and welcome. We are so delighted to see everybody here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jennifer Rosales, and I serve as the Senior Vice President for Community and Campus Life and the Chief Student Affairs Officer. And I am delighted to be here with our special guest and Duncan. And I want to thank my partner over there, Mike Harity. We work very closely together with the Teevens Center. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation on leading through uncertainty, navigating setbacks, and responding to rapid change. Before we begin, I also want to acknowledge the many people in this room who have helped make the Teevens Center possible. To our donors, our partners, our colleagues, and friends of the center, thank you very, very much. Your belief in this work has helped create opportunities like today's conversations, and we are deeply grateful for your support. We are also proud that this event marks the inaugural Teevens Center Leadership Fellows program. Thank you for being our pilot, Jeff. The program is designed to bring highly respected leaders to campus for meaningful, practical engagement with Dartmouth students, faculty, and staff around leadership, performance, decision-making, culture, and growth. This is an opportunity for our community to learn directly from leaders whose experiences can help others lead and perform at their best. It is especially fitting that this program carries forward the spirit of Buddy Teevens' leadership. I know many in this audience knew Buddy personally, and many more know the impact of his legacy at Dartmouth and beyond. Buddy believes deeply in developing people, building strong cultures, and helping students grow through the pursuit of excellence. His legacy is central to the work of the Teevens Center and this fellowship. In one way, we hope to extend it beyond the impact of Dartmouth. Our conversations will be led here by Dr. Duncan Simpson, the director of the Teevens Center for Peak for Performance. And he will be joined by Jeff Immelt, Dartmouth class of 1978, former CEO of General Electric, and the inaugural Teevens Center Leadership Fellow. Thank you. Over the course of this career, Jeff has led through periods of significant transformation, offering valuable perspectives on decision-making, adaptability, and guiding organizations through uncertain times. Please join me in welcoming Duncan and Jeff to the conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome back to Hanover, Jeff. I know we've been together for a few days now, and I know this is a very special place for you, and I really appreciate you willing to be the inaugural Teevens Leadership Fellow. We have a number of friends in the audience. We have coaches, we have staff, and community members. And again, I want to thank you all for being here. And with that, we're gonna just jump right in because they want to hear from you. So, you and Buddy Teevens shared the field here at Dartmouth. When you think about Buddy Teevens and his leadership, what stands out for you now, especially given the leadership journey that you've been through?
So first, let me tell you how great it is to be back. You know, I've been maybe 10 years since I've been here. The place looks great. The students are amazing. I just...
Might have to switch that on for you.
That work better? Yeah, there we go. The students are amazing, and I just have had a smile on my face for 48 hours. So, like, congrats to all of you. It's amazing to be here. The second thing that I would say is, like, you know, if I look back on my life, one of the three best decisions I ever made was come to Dartmouth. And the person that led me to Dartmouth was my football coach. So I love coaches. Coaches helped me so much in my life. And my high school football coach, you know, I was about ready to go. Grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was a pretty good I was a good enough high school football player to play at a lousy school, you know? So I got football scholarships to places like Vanderbilt, Northwestern, stuff like that. My football coach says, you might want to think, you know, about the Ivy League, you know, I know some guys, I can get you a trip and things like that. And I came to Hanover in February of my senior year in high school. I fell in love with the place, and I've been associated with it since that period of time. I spent a lot of time with football players. I spent a lot of time on the football team. So I love the place. But I also say thanks to people like Sammy and the rest of you that are coaches here today because I wouldn't be here without all the great experiences I had in athletics. I'd make two comments, Duncan, because we're going to come back to Buddy, is just what a great teammate he was, because he was not flashy, not arrogant. He was a humble, dedicated, awesome athlete. Hockey player, football player, a friend to everybody in the locker room, whether you were third team or starter. He was an awesome dude as a 20-year-old. All of you have had teammates like that who have the combination of being the best, the most talented, are also the best person. And when the most talented player on a team is also the best human being, you get culture. That was Buddy as a player. As a coach, I would see friends, I would run into alumni, I'd say like that, and they would say, my son played at Dartmouth, Buddy Teevens has changed his life. Buddy Teevens has changed his life. So both as a 20-year-old and then as he progressed here, this was just a guy that made a difference in so many lives. So I'm sad that he's not here, but I celebrate with all of you the opportunity to know Buddy Teevens.
I really appreciate that, Jeff. And when we think about football or sports more broadly, what did you learn from participating in football or sports that really helped you on your leadership journey as you went forward into GE?
So I tell people, and I've told people not just this week, but in my career, that I kind of am the mashup of three things. I was a math nerd, so I was a math major, and that gave me confidence to just figure things out. So at the arc of a business career, I figured out how to globalize companies, I figured out how to drive change, and I always had confidence that no matter what the situation is, I could figure stuff out. I was a fraternity president. There's lots of things I can't talk about that. But, you know, like, I have one of the best networks in the world. I knew how to be a friend. I knew how to be a peer. And I would tell my students, like I taught the last couple of years at Stanford, I'd say, look, there's some things you can learn from me. There's some things you should never learn from me. But I have a top 10 network. I know so many people. I learned that at Dartmouth. And I was a football player. And, you know, I could talk about perseverance. I could talk about teamwork and stuff like that. But what I really learned in football was perseverance, that like sometimes things don't work. It's the ultimate meritocracy. And so, you know, like when things are great, like when it's a good play, that's cool. Like everybody likes good, right? But it's when you miss the block and Buddy gets tackled, you go back to the huddle, he's staring at you. That's when you got to persevere. And I've had times in my career on top and on the bottom. And I have to say that the spirit of football taught me perseverance. There's always the next play, accountability, and that's all three of those things I got when I was at Dartmouth. So no, I'm super thankful.
So jumping into the career side of things, in your book you said you didn't really have a plan. And I'm sure that's reassuring for some younger people in the audience and reassuring for myself. But when you look back, how did the lack of planning actually help you in your career?
Yeah, so how many people are seniors here? Anybody, any seniors? Yeah. So like, I see the seniors and they're all like, oh God, 5 more weeks. My life ends in 5 weeks. So sad. No, like, the journey's so much fun, you know? Like, the uncertainty of the journey is so much fun. And I've told people this week that, like, you don't leave Dartmouth. You bring a part of Dartmouth to every team you're on, every person you meet. And so it's kind of like Duncan, you know, one of the pieces of advice is like, let life come to you. It's super uncertain. There's a ton of things going on. There's artificial intelligence and things like that. But let life kind of come to you. And if you're ready, if you're capable, if you're willing to learn, willing to change, things like that, you know, I just think that's kind of the way it is for best things to happen. So when I graduated from Dartmouth, you know, I wasn't ready for prime time. I was still in party mode. I wasn't really grown up yet. So I worked for a year, and then I went back to business school. And by the time I graduated from business school, I was good to go. And that was showtime. And I made the decision when I was in business school that I was going to do whatever, I was going to work hard, I was going to move anywhere, I was going to get the most out of my potential I could possibly get. I made that decision, and I graduated when I was 25 or 26, and I was good to go. But my plan was like I wanted to learn how to be a good manager. You know, I'd worked summers for a consulting firm. I liked the people I worked with, but that wasn't for me. Like, I didn't want to advise people. I wanted to do things. So I said the first 5 years, I'm going to go learn a trade. I'm going to go learn how to be a manager. G was a good place to learn how to be a manager. And then I was going to see where the next 5 years took me. And 5 years turned into 35 years. But it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. There was change, there was different jobs, there were moves. There were times on the bottom, times on the top. But, you know, at every step, and again, I would say everybody in this room, I was willing to bet on myself. So what you earn with a Dartmouth degree is you earn the ability to bet on yourself. And it's up to you to take it, to not be afraid of it, but to take it. So I would just say, like, let it happen. Let the doors open. And, you know, the journey's so much fun. You're going to meet so many cool people. You're going to be able to do so many neat things. The journey is great fun.
So you held many different roles at GE. You went through a grueling 6-month interview process to become the CEO. And then 4 days later, after you're announced as the CEO, 9/11 happens. And then within your first week, 80 billion is taken off the stock price of GE. Now, that's one hell of a first week.
Boy, those were the days. Thanks, Duncan. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah.
So what does leadership look like when there is no playbook? You've just stepped into the CEO role, 9/11's happened, market values, you know, taken off. So what do you do there? What's the playbook when there is no playbook?
So I think the number one thing is, you, as a leader, you have to absorb fear. You have to be willing to absorb fear. You know, my business school students at Stanford, you know, all the professors there say, you got to be transparent about everything and just be, you know, tell everybody everything all the time. That's not right. You know, what you got to do is you got to give people context. So if I got up the day after 9/11, my message to the team was, we're screwed. We own 1,300 aircraft. The world's a mess. That's not leadership. Leadership is, look, here's what's going on. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here's the decisions we have to make today. Follow me. We're gonna figure out what to do. We're gonna figure out together, and we're gonna get there over time. Absorb fear. Truth, give people truth, but give them context. Give them a path. The second thing is you got to find the right people. You got to find the people that aren't going to freeze under pressure, that can do things. We own 1,200 aircraft. The world commercial aircraft economy shut down. And I was like 4 days on the job, right? 7 airlines were going bankrupt. And because airplanes could be used as weapons, we couldn't let people fly. So every night we would have these panic meetings. And about 3 days after 9/11, I go in, and there's a whole team of people in the room, and they say, American Airlines is going to go bankrupt tomorrow unless we buy $2 billion of EETC bonds. I said, oh, wow. What's a EETC bond? You know, can somebody explain to me what a EETC bond is? So I had this great vice chairman named Dennis Airman. He goes up on the board, spends 30 minutes. All of my peer, like the guys that suddenly had become my subordinates, we used to be peers, they're chirping, yeah, just kind of. And Dennis says, you guys shut up. This is what we're going to do. Jeff, what do you think? I say, Dennis, what do you think? He says, okay, let's do it. So we do it, right? So you got to find the people around you that are going to be able to keep their cool when everybody else is panicking. And then the third thing, Duncan, is you got to make decisions kind of on time. Like the whole world resets. You're learning every minute. You got to wait to make decisions. You can't be too late, but you can't be too early. And then you got to communicate every day. You got to tell the story every day. You got to communicate over and over again because people are afraid. Like after 9/11, not only were you afraid of, you know, the economy or whatever your job was, but you were afraid for the country. So you're the conduit that gives people the confidence that they can keep doing things. So what prepares you for that? all the other experiences you've had in your life that were panic-stricken at a smaller scale, they all help you build the muscle that helps you be prepared to do it on a broader scale. So I always tell people when they're starting a career, two things, like join people you like, find a culture, and be willing to do really hard jobs really early in your career. Because you're going to build muscles that are going to stick with you your entire career.
So as a follow-up, how do you communicate and lead people when you don't have all the answers?
I think what's most important is you give people what you know, but you try to put it in a context that they can deal with, right? So, not only after 9/11, but during most of you guys weren't born in the financial crisis, some of you were, but that was really terrible. That was really like, you didn't even want to get up in the morning because you had no idea all the panic that was going on, kind of around the world. And so, what you try to do is give people what you know, but put it in a context that they can understand, that their part of the world can do something with it. And the hardest thing to do is to say, I don't know. In fact, I wish at times I had done that more often, because that's okay. I mean, it's okay to tell people in a moment of crisis, look, I don't know the answer, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out together. It's going to take us this long to figure out the answer. And being willing to not have every answer is also a form of leadership. But, Duncan, time in and time out, you got to show up. People want to see their leader when times are tough. People want to see the boss, not on Zoom. They want to see their face. They want you to show up. They don't want you to shirk. They don't want you to hide. They want you to be there. So I just think like finding ways to just be present for your team, even when you don't know all the answers.
So obviously with 9/11, the financial crisis, two big challenges. With your experience, what do you think you got right, and what would you do differently now?
Oh gosh, I think that, in a crisis, you always have to hold like two truths. Like, things can get worse, but there's going to be a future. And I think one of the things I always got right is I hung on to the future. I didn't mortgage the future for the panic today. And during the financial crisis, my CFO was a Notre Dame grad, great guy, named Keith Sharon. And Keith would come to my office and he'd say like, things can't get worse. And I'd say, actually, Keith, things are going to get worse. I think things actually can get worse, but we're going to have to figure out some of those things. We're going to have to figure out some of those things together. And then I would say I had the chance after 9/11, in particular, Duncan, to reshape the company in a pretty specific way. But in order to do that, I would have to have cast a shadow on my predecessor. And I was too loyal. I was very loyal to him. He was kind of like the Elon Musk of the era. He was a very famous guy. And for me to pivot probably where I could have pivoted the company, it would have had to cast a shadow, and I just wasn't willing. In other words, I think if I had done that, it might have made me feel better, but it would have made everybody in the company feel worse. And I wasn't willing to make that decision at that time. And I paid for it, So again, I don't carry it as a burden, but it's an answer to your question. Like, you never get all these things completely right. And a crisis is like a pass-fail test. Like, people who say, I want to get an A-, they end up getting an F. But people just say, I need to live another day. Those are the people that win. You guys know Jamie Dimon, right? JP Morgan CEO, pretty famous, maybe most famous CEO in the country right now, great guy. He was a business school classmate of mine, so we've been friends for 40 years, right? And he was at my house in 2008, and during the financial crisis at a Christmas party, and the JP Morgan stocks at like $10, and GE's like at $6, and we're getting crapped on by everybody, and we're sitting there having a drink together, and he turns to me and says, Jeff, we got them right where we want them. It's like we really got them now. So it's just like everybody, all of you are going to be in the dumper sometime. It's the one thing I can say with 100% certainty. And in some ways, that's the best moment to be around. I look at Dartmouth today, and I would say, like elite schools are in the dumper. And if you don't believe that, you're not living in the world. We're the best house in a bad neighborhood. We're the best house in a bad neighborhood. What an opportunity. I've never seen Dartmouth in all my time with more of a differentiated opportunity in every part of our campus than right now. You guys know what I'm saying? What an opportunity we have to really build this place and take it to a higher level, where we serve not only students, but we serve our fellow citizens and stuff like that. I might have another year of eligibility, Sammy. I don't know. How you doing on the offensive line? How you doing on the offensive line? Can you handle somebody that runs a 5.4 40 or something like that? I'm super psyched for the school. Again, because of what we've done, but also the ecosystem we're in needs leadership. That could be really cool.
So pivoting back to the conversation you had with Jamie Dimon, there's a lot of optimism in there. However, when you're under that much pressure and scrutiny, as a leader, how do you take care of yourself, both physically, mentally, so that you don't fall apart, to be honest?
Yeah, I kept my life simple. I had one company, one wife, one daughter. So I had a very peaceful family life, I have to say. Look, accountability matters. When you're not hitting your numbers or you're not doing what you said you're going to do, all of us are accountable, right? So accountability matters. There's a level above accountability that says, I tried my best. I told the truth. I treated everybody I came in contact with respect, and I'm willing to live with the consequences. I tried my best. I told the truth. I treated everybody around me with respect. I'm willing to live with the consequences. So even on the darkest days, I hung my hat on that. I tried to take good care of myself personally, but leadership is this intense journey into yourself, right? It's how fast you can learn, how much pressure can you take, can you rejuvenate yourself? That's what it takes to be a leader, right? There's no tougher critic on me than me. There's no tougher critic on me than me. So you go through these stretches where you go to bed at night and you look in the mirror and you say, you're horrible. You've done nothing right. You're a failure. You're the worst person in the world. And you get up in the morning and you're shaving and you say, hello, handsome. You're the best dude that's ever lived. You're such an amazing guy. And if you guys want to run the distance, you got to be willing to go through these cycles of self-doubt and wake up rejuvenated and passionate to lead and to face people. And do it day after day after day after day. And that's part of the journey, right? That's part of the journey. And you recognize, look, nobody ever knows anything about you after you've beaten Brown 41-0. We don't know anything about you. But if you, let's say, I won't even use the name. I was going to say, if you lose, I don't know, Sammy. It can't be Yale or Harvard. But let's say you lose by 2 points and you come back and beat Harvard the next week. That's when we know if you're any good. That's when we know if you're any good. If you face down something really bad, you can get through it. So I always try to keep my eyes open, Duncan, for the people that were performing at the worst time. Because those are the people that are ultimately going to be your best leaders.
So going back to your education at Dartmouth, you're a math major. You always said you could solve problems. But in your book, you also said, in a crisis, some people point fingers and others solve problems. So what separates those two groups in the real world.
Yeah. Look, if you're at home and there's a fire in your neighborhood and somebody yells fire, everybody in the neighborhood goes and grabs a bucket and it helps. And if somebody yells arson, everybody drives away. And that happens every day in the business world and every day in life, right? So you tend to keep your eyes open for problem solvers. And problem solvers are people that are willing to roll their shirt sleeves up. They're willing to completely navigate a path. They know that no job is beneath them. And those are the people you try to find in a crisis. When I was 32 years old, I was running our appliance service business in the middle of the biggest product recall that we'd ever had. We had 3.5 million compressors fail, and I was running the service technicians that had to go fix them. And we had to go to headquarters. Jack Walsh was my boss. He was a screamer, man. He was a tough dude. I learned so much from him, but he was a tough dude. So we went up there, and there were 4 of us, and CEO, CFO, I ran the service business. CO starts off and says, this really stinks, and we're going to have to write off $500 million. And Welch just like screams like an animal. Ah! I almost like wet my pants. I was like so scared. He fires the CEO and the CFO. So I'm next in the bucket, and I, once a week, went out and fixed compressors. I had a uniform with my name on it, and I would sit on a kitchen floor, and I fixed compressors. So for the next hour, he quizzed me on how all the repairs took place. And I knew how many steps it took. I knew how many minutes it took. I knew what the wrench did. I knew how much a compressor. By the way, I was horrible. You didn't want me in your kitchen. There would be ice cream melting all over the floor. But for the next hour, I was like quiz champion of the world. And so we leave. I go home, and I say to my wife, look, I got to get my resume ready because 2 guys got fired. I'm the next man up. We're going to have to move. I had a baby, 32 years old. Walk in the office the next day. Welch is on the phone. You were awesome. You were amazing. Thank you so much. We had to fire your boss. He was horrible. But you're okay, and like, so it's just like problems are problems. Don't run away from them. Learn them. Learn all the elements about them, right? And you can make as much money as a business person. You can make as much money from solving problems as you can any other time. There's an article in the Harvard Business Review by Bill Walsh, maybe 25 years ago. And the essence of the article was coaching players 3 through 7. So the basic thesis was, you got 3 people on the team you never need to coach because they're awesome. And you got 2 people on the team that are coach killers, and you got to get them. But if you can take the people in the middle and make them 2 or 3 units better, that's how you build a winning team. And so that's what I mean, by problem solving. If you can make incremental improvement on the people that are coachable, you're going to have great teams. And I think that's the way business, that's the way sports are, that's the way kind of everything is. Don't run away from it, face into it, and learn it. Become a domain expert on it.
I mean, it's just some great advice there. And we're going to pivot a little bit to decision making. In your book, you said some of the hardest decisions don't maximize upside, they just avoid the greater loss. So how do you lead people through those moments?
Yeah, look, I think it's with really honesty, but also decisiveness. Kind of like, if you fear being judged, you can't lead. So if you can't say there are 2 magic words to being a leader. Blame me. Like, if you're not really willing to say blame me, find a different task. During the financial crisis was so brutal. So we were, this would have been like, let's say, October 1st of 2008. The world's going crazy. We had too much unsecured debt. So we had to go out and do like a $20 billion equity raise at a moment when the markets were cratering. And we had to get it done at absolutely the worst moment in time. So, like Friday night, I had a bunch of bankers from Goldman Sachs. They kind of convinced us. The next morning, I had to do like a board call. So in those days, there was no Zoom. You were just looking at a telecom post in the middle of a conference room. And I'm like, hey guys, it's tough out there. We got to go raise $20 billion on Monday. So it's not like people said, hey, good idea, Jeff. Thanks, man. Like dead silence on the phone. And my favorite director when I was CEO is a guy named Roger Penske, race car owner. You wouldn't think that he would be a great director of an industrial company, the best. So Roger yells out, let's go get the money, guys, great job. Everybody else goes, great job, great job. Like without him, we'd still be sitting at that conference room like 20 years later. So we planned it over the weekend. It was going to get, we were going to get crushed. We got Warren Buffett to invest a couple $2 billion. Like 6 banks go bankrupt over the weekend, and what's called TARP doesn't pass. So the world's in free fall, and we had to make the call by 7 p.m. on a Sunday night whether or not to do this biggest equity raise in the history of the country, right? So I had to go walk down the hall to a room full of bankers and executives, and it's about, 50 yards from my office to the conference room. And like, I wanted to like just walk down the hall, but duck in the men's room and start sucking my thumb. Like, I want my mommy, please. somebody. I felt like being crushed like a diamond. We decided not to go because the world was unsteady. The markets couldn't even be closed on Monday. The market's down like 15% on Monday. We waited 2 days. We issued the equity on Wednesday. We priced it above plan, things like that. That one decision was the best decision I ever made. The most important and strategic decision I'd ever made. And it was horrible, I got crushed for it. But it's like your job, I go back to all of you that are gonna leave here. Hopefully lots of Dartmouth people end up leading the world someday. You can't fear judgment, right? You got to go make the right decisions for your team at the right moment in time without fear of judgment. And then you can lead. And look, a lot of you are coaches in the room today. Like you got to make all those choices. You cut your best player who's a culture killer. You're going to get a ton of crap for that. But coaches around the country are doing that every day because they view the totality of the team better than any individual. Those are brutal decisions to make. So you do it if you're a startup, you do it as a big company, making those difficult decisions. And by the way, Duncan, that's how you build teamwork. When I go back and see my old colleagues, of which I have lots of them, we spend lots of time together, we don't talk about the good days. We say, God, you remember that in 2009, how terrible it was? What we did together, that was amazing, and it's kind of like that's what you gravitate back to. That's what you remember the most. Because you see each other in a natural light. You don't see each other with a shadow of kind of like lucky indifference, Like there's 2 mistakes you make. You make a mistake by giving up on a really good person who's in a really bad situation. And then you make a mistake by promoting a bad person who's in a great situation. And I made both those mistakes. And so what you try to do is learn enough about individuals in the situation so you can make steady calls.
So I just want to rewind. Something that really stood out to me as you said the 2 most important words are blame me. So what does real accountability look like when you're a CEO of a gigantic company? What does real accountability look like?
I think you just don't hide. You've got to be physically present on the worst days. You got to be willing to go on CNBC when you miss your quarterly earnings. You got to be willing to do town halls when things are tough. You got to be willing to be accountable to your team when things are there. You got to be able to be transparent to your board, like telling them the good things and the bad. And you just got to be willing to kind of go with it. There were probably like 5 years. So like the day Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, running a big company, successful company, but you basically say, look, we're in a brutal neighborhood. It's going to take us a couple years to get out of this, right? And so, like when you're going to be in a stretch that's bad, it doesn't it doesn't do anybody any good to make it worse by being pessimistic or cynical or things like that. I just kind of like believe in the power of optimism, you know, and let all the cards go out there, but show people a path forward. And there was probably 2 or 3 years where maybe not everybody on the board loved me, but nobody wanted my job. You know, nobody sat there and said, like, I really wish I could do it. I know I could do it so much better. You know, sometimes it's just hard. You know, when Buddy came back here in, I don't know, 2006 or 7 or 8, our football program was a mess. Our football program was a mess. And anybody that didn't think it was going to take 5 years or 10 years to turn it around wasn't real about where it was going to be. And so, you know, when I was on the board, probably 2011 or 12, we started the season 0-4, 0-5. And I called the president and the AD, and I said, don't even think about it. Don't even fucking think about it. Okay? That's probably the only good thing I did on the Dartmouth board, I have to say. You know, because you know, we all created this mess. We all tolerated mediocrity and let it flourish. And so it was wrong, and that was a pivot point for Buddy, right? And then we got better. He hired different coaches, and the rest is history, right? So being able to differentiate the person from the environment, see it clearly, and build on it, right? That is something that's super important.
And I love that. And talking to people, obviously in your role, you had the opportunity to sit with world leaders, heads of state. And one of the things you talked about in the book was when you were going into these meetings, you would think to yourself and ask yourself, what do they need? What challenges are they facing? What's their biggest worry? So approaching it like that, how did that change the leadership conversation when you're sitting down with a Bush, Obama, Putin, Xi? How did that change the conversation when you're focused on their needs?
So I think, you know, like I had this incredible honor to have a job where I could get smarter every day. But I also had the opportunity, I could see anybody in the world. You know, when I was COG, I could see anybody in the world. And it's up to you to make sure they'll see you again. So the skills of being able to see people again, I learned at this place. You know, I learned at Dartmouth. Is the opportunity that people would want to be with you more than one time. So part of it is being well-read, being well-read, being interesting, knowing what's going on in the world, right? Part of it is kind of like understanding their world and seeing the world through their eyes. And if you can bring an interesting point of view on your side, but if you can see their situation through their eyes, they're always going to be your friend. And that's the way I always try to approach it. Like if you're in Washington, you're seeing a senator or vice president, something like that, they have different customers than you do, right? They have a different objectives than you do. And you want to try, before you leave, to make it a reciprocal relationship where you might be able to do something for them and they can do something for you. Now, asking them what they needed, I was 1 in 100 because nobody else in my roles were doing that. You know, I ran President Obama's Jobs Council, and he wanted to have a conversation about tax policy. And I brought in like 5 of the biggest Wall Street CEOs, and we had an hour with President Obama in the Oval Office. And I said, guys, let's go in and let's just at first ask President Obama what's on his mind and what he's thinking. So we get in and sit down, and a very well-known CEO starts by saying, you got to give us repatriation so we can get our money back. Come on, Mr. President, what's wrong with you? I said, dude, come on now. You know, just didn't you listen to your instructions before you went? It ruined the whole meeting. Ruined the tenor of the whole meeting, right? So it's all about like through osmosis, what you're learning at Dartmouth is how to be a good peer. How do you learn to get along? A football team, you know, Sammy and the coaches, they can build a lot of culture. A lot of the culture is self-discipline. It's mutual accountability. It's how you treat each other. Are you keeping it real? Are you giving people feedback? Things like that. And so I just think, Duncan, it's understanding this two-way relationship that if you can create that, you build a bond, you build a network. And if every time you talk to somebody, you're asking for a favor, you're going to get one, but you're not going to get two. So that's how you build relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I'm going to dig a little deeper. And I know we were just meeting with Tuck students. And you said, you know, great leaders are system leaders.
Yeah.
So they think about the system. So who can you, system leaders who can see what's coming next. So what separates those leaders that can see the big picture from everyone else?
Yeah, so I think so think about the world we live in today. You've got artificial intelligence, you got a war in the Middle East, you got a bunch of stuff that's going on. Every I'd say great academic institution is going to go through their part of change. So I think people that are great systems leaders, they know how to see the world both from the bottoms up and the tops down. They've got an incredible knowledge of like how does the last mile work, but how does it work kind of as an ecosystem. They understand, you know, kind of incentives. What makes this system work? You know, like most times people will do the right thing, but they will always do what they get paid to do. So understanding how incentives work from that aspect. Good systems leaders understand two time horizons. One is tomorrow, and the other one is forever. So they don't get lost in like big visions, but they don't give up on visions. But they always break the huddle and say, here's what the next play is going to be, right? Here's what the next play is going to be. So that they're able to be masters of time horizon. And then I think the last thing about good systems leaders is they know how to communicate in three voices, right? You know, again, I worked for a really famous CEO, tough guy, great guy. And lots of books have been written about it, but his super strength was he knew how to communicate in three voices, right? He could stand and he could give a speech at commencement in front of 10,000 people and you'd be spellbound. And he'd have vocabulary, vision, things like that. He could run a huddle of 20 people, do a business review. He'd be specific, numerical. Everybody in the room would know what they were supposed to do. And he could deal with you one-on-one. Like, here's how you're doing. Here's what I think, things like that. I was running the healthcare business, and we had about, let's say, 45% of the U.S. healthcare is done by the Catholic charities. So I had the leadership team of the Catholic charities up to headquarters, and they had breakfast with Jack Welch. And so the leader of the group was like nun, Mother Superior, and she starts out the breakfast. We had to do a prayer. And she says, you know, Mr. Welch, are you afraid you're going to go to hell? You've laid off so many people. And I said, oh, shit, man. I'm screwed. I'm not going to make it out of breakfast. And so for the next 2 hours, he was a master class of teaching, of relatability, of kindness, of education. I sat in awe of how he was able to get a message of capitalism, but do it in a way without offending them. Amazing. So we take them to the elevator. They go, they're smiling. It was great. And then he turns to me and puts his finger on my chest. Your inventory's too high. What's wrong with you? And I said, what happened to that, Jack Welch? I want the same one the nuns got, you know? So I think if you're able, you know, particularly in times of chaos, if you're able to paint big picture but also very specific, you can get people done. So I think like you know, always break things down into the right questions, see kind of like these complicated patterns, go high to low, but really be able to articulate your point of view. And particularly right now, there's so much I would say, understanding and misunderstanding about things like artificial intelligence and things like that. You know, you've got to find ways to break through the noise. Yeah.
So previously you said, I wish I got more comfortable with saying I don't know more often. So how did that evolution happen for you as a leader? When did you get comfortable with saying I don't know?
Yeah. So who in here has ever had imposter syndrome? That's the problem. In other words, when I first became CEO, I had imposter syndrome. And when you have imposter syndrome, what do? I know it all. I got the answer. I'm ready to go, things like that. And I got 100 times more humble the longer I did the job. The more knowledge I had, the more humble I became. So I think the issue is, as you go through these time periods where you have imposter syndrome, you're not self-confident, is to fight the urge to feel like you know more than you really know. And so, Duncan, I'd say that's what trapped me, is I wasn't comfortable enough in my own skin to say, I don't know. And so I would just advise everybody, when you take a new job or you get in an unfamiliar situation, don't let your own insecurity turn into things where you're giving people advice when you really don't know what the right answers are. And always be willing to say, again, what I would say is, like, I don't know, but here's how I'm going to figure it out. Here's the people that are the experts. We're going to bring in McKinsey and let them help us, or Goldman Sachs or something like that. So you always got to be willing to ask for help when it happens. But look, we all go through time periods when we're not comfortable in our own skin. And those are the times when you can do the most damage.
Just that statement, we're going to figure it out, speaks to optimism. The last kind of 48 hours I've got to speak to you, the optimism keeps shining through. In today's environment, how do you think optimism, or how do you think about optimism as a leadership skill?
Yeah, look, I think, you live, kind of like the way you live your life is kind of a choice, and there's different paths you can take. I think, I always kind of chose optimism, but I wasn't foolish. I'm not a fool. So I kind of knew what was going on, but I wanted to kind of tell people, again, I go back to, I wanted to kind of tell people that I really think we can get there, and if we don't, you can blame me. I go back to, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the uncertainty of how the outcome's going to be. And a lot of cynics don't want to be blamed for anything. I'm on boards now, and frequently, a lot of startup companies, but I'm on boards now, and a lot of boards will say, to the CEO, like, Mr. and Mrs. X, you're just too optimistic. And that's code for they don't want to be blamed. It's really a code, and I'll always grab the CEO or the founder and say, don't listen to that shit. Like, just like, you need people to follow you, show them the way, and things like that. And you go through time periods where, Duncan, after the financial crisis, we were in the penalty box. So what do you got 350,000 people working for you. What are you supposed to say? Like, okay, team, we're really pathetic. You guys feeling good now? Everybody feeling good? Or do you say, look, we're going to get through this together? Here's, they don't love us right now. Look, all of the products that GE uses today in aviation and power and stuff like that were engineered right after the financial crisis when people hated us. So do you walk in and say, we're horrible? So I just think it's kind of like how you want to look at the world, how you want to lead people. You don't want to be dishonest. You want to tell people things that aren't true. But what you want to say is, here's a path. Here's a path, and follow me. I'm willing to be judged. I'm willing to be blamed. Follow me. Let's go.
So that's a great transition to really today's world. We have many students, recent graduates that are entering a world shaped by AI, political unrest. We got kind of global uncertainty with the war in Iran and rapid change all over the place. If you were graduating from Dartmouth today, what would you be paying attention to? And then what skills and habits would you be trying to build?
Yeah, look, I think, the bigger the mess, the more opportunity you have. So I know you don't believe me, but I'm right. When I got out of business school, I was $50,000 in debt. Interest rates were 16% and unemployment was 10%. You know, that wasn't cool, you know. It didn't feel that welcoming. You know, my first house I paid like $112,000 for, and I got a 1-year adjustable mortgage. And I was hoping I'd get promoted before the mortgage rate went up. When I got out of business school, I signed a $50,000 balloon loan. And it was a 5-year balloon. I go out, I get married, my daughter's born, and our first Christmas, I come home, my wife is like crying. And she says, this got to be a mistake. We just got a bill for $50,000. And I said, shit, I knew I forgot something, you know, like, sorry, hon, but this is on me, you know, so it's always dark. It's always kind of dark. I would say, just be willing to learn. Get out on your path. Be willing to learn. Be good at asking questions. Seek other good people. Hang around other good people and be willing to do really tough jobs. You know, artificial intelligence is real. It's going to change a lot of what we do. It's not as much as what we're going to figure out artificial intelligence over decades, maybe 5 years or maybe more. We're going to figure out where it's going to go. But embrace the tools. Learn how to use them in whatever workspace you've got. Be good at where the tools are. But, you know, I've known Michael Dell, Jeff Bezos, Reed Hastings. I've known all those guys in my career. The one thing they all had in common is immense curiosity and willingness to learn. So that would be the one piece of advice I'd give everybody, Duncan, is just leave here as a learner. Embrace everything that comes your way, and you're going to just be able to figure stuff out in your own time and in your own way.
I really appreciate that one, Jeff. And a last one from me. If Buddy was sitting here today listening to this conversation, what do you think he'd challenge us to do to be better leaders?
Look, I mean, I would give two elements of the Buddy that I knew that I think all of us can live with today. One is, or maybe three. One is remarkable integrity. Remarkable integrity. You guys have no idea how respected Buddy was from the football ecosystem, from NFL coaches to NFL owners to Roger Goodell. He worked at Archie Manning's camp in Louisiana. I was a counselor. He throws Johnny Manziel out of camp the year after Johnny Manziel won the Heisman Trophy. Manziel's parents went batshit, came up and complained. Archie Manning threw them out and said, Johnny's never welcome to this camp again. Nobody told Buddy what to do. He knew what to do. He always leaned forward into change. You know, Duncan, I saw him at the Houston Super Bowl and the tackling robot he was introducing at kind of a entrepreneurial effort. And I'm sitting next to Buddy and I'm saying, are you sure? I mean, you know, my high school football coach was insane. So we were literally the team that would play a game on a Friday night, and if he was unhappy with our performance, we would keep practicing after the game. I mean, these days, you'd throw this guy in jail. That was my, and I was saying to Buddy, like, are you sure this thing's going to work? He said, yeah, no, we're going to be better football players. And the last thing, which I think is true for all my friends here today, is he believed in the process. You know, in other words, he wasn't in it for the glory. He wasn't in it for recognition. He was in to develop young men. And whether he was coaching a 7th grade football team or Dartmouth College or anywhere in between, Buddy had a passion for the process. And I think, you know, you look at all the coaches here today, you guys are the same way. All of you are the same way. And that you really are about the student athlete, getting them to, look, I mean, I watch Nick Saban on Saturday mornings on the college football game day. he talks process, you know? Like you sit there and say, like, Nick Saban's an awesome coach, but if he were like coaching 7th grade kids, he'd be the same. I feel sorry for him, but he'd be the same guy. That's what great coaches do. So I'd say Buddy, his integrity, his willing to lean forward, but his respect for the process, and really everybody that's played for you guys, they feel like they're better people having played Dartmouth football. And I think that's awesome. Yeah.
So those were my questions. I was very fortunate. Unfortunately, Kirsten couldn't be here today, but I reached out to Kirsten, and she had a question for
Yeah,
you.
great.
So she said, from locker rooms at Dartmouth to boardrooms at GE, what's the most important ingredient in building a winning culture?
So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is I was living in Chicago, and I'm walking my baby, who's probably 3 months old, down the street, and I run into Buddy jogging up the street. So Kirsten grew up in Western Springs, Illinois, which is the town we lived in, so small world category. And I wish Kirsten nothing but the best. You know, again, your culture is only as good as the worst person you're willing to tolerate. So your culture is only as good as the worst person you're willing to tolerate. So if you want to have a great culture, you've got to be willing to deal with the people that kill culture. And I find if you bring like people together, having a great culture is easy, but one person can kill it. And I think find out that person and be willing to be very tough-minded, because sometimes they can be your best player. So I think that's the thing, is you cannot tolerate anything other than commitment to the cause.
I have two more quick questions. One from Austin Driggers, our Executive Director of Peak Performance, and his question was, at a company as complex as GE, with seemingly endless demands on your time, how do you decide day to day where to place your attention?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, as I grew in my career, I almost completely stopped drinking. So, when I was early in my career as a salesman, I would check in a hotel and say, like, where's the nightclub? And then you transition over to where's the health club? So you physically have to be really diligent about the conditioning of your mind and your body. And then I would say super disciplined about time. The only way you can run a big, complex organization is you have to be super disciplined about time, and you've got to be very disciplined about the people that are at the top of the organization. So you've got great leaders, and you're managing your time well. I would say I spent about a third of my time on people. Let's say 30% of my time on people, 30% of my time on growth and strategy, 30% of my time on problems, and then 10% on governance and investors and communication. And I never allowed my assistant to put anything on my schedule that I didn't approve. So I had 100% control over my schedule all the time. And I would kind of update it on a weekly basis. Every Saturday for probably 40 or 50 years, I would sit in the morning and I would go through, here's how I spent my time the last week. Here's how I spend my time the next week. And am I really aligned with what's most important for the company? So the ability to kind of determine what's most important and dedicate your time to those things that are most important, that is the discipline that I have. And so when I teach, I always kind of, even people that are MBAs, I'm always like super focused on how they're spending their time. I used to, we had a big training institute, and I used to do, probably twice a month, I'd do teaching sessions with my team, or, these would be 3, maybe 4 levels below me. And somebody would raise their hand and say, I could be a star, but my managers hold me down. I mean, all these stupid meetings, and all this stuff. And I said, let's look at your Outlook. Take out your laptop. Let's bring up your laptop. I do it in front of like 80 people. And so they would have to go through like a month's worth of schedule. And I do it in like excruciating detail. And I say, well, that looks like that's your time. That looks like you don't need to be here. So I'd carve out their time, and they were always like, it was a teaching moment, you know, but my message was, you actually have more ownership over your time than you think. You have it earlier in your career than you think. And if you give up on owning your time, you can't be an effective leader. So I was super, super diligent about that.
So one last question from the audience. I don't know where Mark is. Mark Bernfeld was instrumental in bringing you here, and I know he's been a friend of yours for 50 years. So as a good friend, he says, how do you deal with public failure? There is more to this question. He says, we all experience failures, but as a bold and high-profile leader, your failures are shown to the world. You're a really competitive guy. That must have been hard. So how do you deal with public failure?
Yeah, I think I give you two aspects. Like, one is, if you're going to lead a public life, it's going to happen. You know, there's no escaping it. If you're going to lead an active public life, there's just no escaping it. The second thing is like, most people don't care. You know, like you sit there and say like, oh my God, everybody's looking at me. Most people don't care. You know, they have their own issues to deal with. So you tend to over dramatize everything. And then the third thing I'd say is, look, I've been married 40 years. I've tried to keep my wife and daughter, their life separate, both because I wanted to protect them, but also because you need a place to go and hide. You need a place, when everybody hates you, you need at least two people that love you, you know? And I always was able to keep those people there. But, you know, I would just say, like, everybody skins their knees. You know, I could go down all the people you read about, all the people that you see, you know, it's just part of it. Now, if you want to be a teacher, if you want to be a teacher, you know, people, maybe they get attracted by glamour, but they learn from grit. So if you want to be a teacher, you got to be willing to share the good stuff, but also the bad stuff, right? So that's what I'd say. Look, everybody skins their knees. You just can't let that matter. And again, where did I learn that? Playing Dartmouth football. You know, not every play works.
Well, that's just a great way to end it. And I don't think we could have had a better inaugural Teevens Center Leadership Fellow than Jeff Immelt. So truly appreciate it, Jeff. And we just have a little something for you.
Oh, great. Well, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Good old 79, baby. How much is NIL now paying?
I feel yours is going to be really high.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you coming.
Good. Thank you.